researchটা করা হয়েছে। So the second round of findings and the comparison between the two rounds. Amra about 20-25 minutes for the presentation. And we have with us Nashiba Salim, a senior gender specialist who will be a discussant. We have invited and are expecting Selima Ahmed, President of the Bangladesh Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Bangladesh Government MP, to join us as a discussant. Join korte paren kina, but at least Nashiba is here. So ei bole shobaike shubechha janiye I'd like to hand over to Mehnaz.
Thank you, Mahinapa. Good morning. Prothome bole di, I think ami ekটু Bangla English মিলিয়ে presentation টা করব. Mostly the presentation will be in English, but discussion টা আমরা বাংলায় করতে পারি. So I'm Mehnaz Rabbani, as Mahinapa kindly introduced, and today's presentation is based on a piece of research that we did on online female entrepreneurs. And we're presenting results from 2 rounds that we've done since the COVID-19 started in March. The research team, as Mahinapa mentioned, I was part of the research team with Ifat Jahan and Mariam Uddin, both research associates at BIGD. So just as the outline of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to start with the background and introduction for the research, describe the methodology a bit, talk about the literature on this sector, show you some demographics and business characteristics of our sample, and then focus on the effect that COVID-19 had on these businesses, and then end with some conclusions, and hopefully have some discussions, and I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. So just as a background, so we all know that COVID-19 has created a very dire situation for almost all types of businesses, irrespective of if they're online, offline, how big they are, etc. We focused on online entrepreneurs who operate through social media pages. Why? Because first of all, this is a very new and emerging sector. Which we thought was interesting because we understand very little about this sector. There's very little work that has been done. And this sector employs mostly home-based female entrepreneurs because of the nature of the business, very low barriers to entry, and you can do it from home. So it's dominated by females, and this is true for all of Asia, not only Bangladesh. These businesses are characterized by very small collections of products, high value add. I just want to be clear at the outset, we are not talking about larger e-commerce platforms. These are individual entrepreneurs who sell a selected product range on personal pages, and they communicate with customers on a personal basis. And we also selected products that are mostly the customer range, the customer base is also women. So when we started thinking about when COVID hit and we thought about how this sector will be affected by COVID, we thought, well, this sector has a lot of advantages and some disadvantages as well. So it is possible that they actually will do better than other businesses that have physical outlets or larger businesses in the informal sector. So this sector, there's very little overhead cost. These are home-based enterprises. They have, small inventories, flexible product range. So it is possible that they are able to quickly scale down when something like COVID happens. And they're also able to quickly scale up and start up operations when they need to. And the specific nature of this crisis is such that online purchasing, online markets have become more active now, especially in the urban areas. People are shopping for essentials more now online, so this sector may benefit from this specific nature of the crisis. Yet these are very small micro enterprises in the informal sectors, and they share all the vulnerabilities of small businesses. So we wanted to see how resilient these new small businesses are, and we started in March and followed them up later. So just a brief on the methodology. So we reached out to 200 female online entrepreneurs, and the way that we selected them was we started with reaching out to online page on Facebook, pages that we knew that targeted female customer base. And then we used Facebook's automated suggestions of similar pages to snowball and reach out to 200 entrepreneurs. Again, the sample does not include larger e-commerce platforms such as Daraz or Evelyn, things like that. So these are individual entrepreneurs. 122 responded, and they were given an online survey, which was available both in Bangla and English. And the first round we did in April, which was right after Pohela Boishakh. And the second round was in May, June, which was right after Eid al-Fitr. So we focused on these two periods because we know that for a lot of these businesses, these two are peak seasons for sales. So we wanted to know how they're coping and what they're doing. In both rounds, we did some in-depth interviews. So for the first round, for data validation, if there were inconsistencies in the data and we had specific questions for specific entrepreneurs, after they had filled out their online survey, we called them and spoke to them for a more in-depth understanding of what they're going through. In the second round, we had 103 of the original 122 respond. In the second round, we had to do more phone interviews because we found that at that time, entrepreneurs were much busier than they were in April. So they didn't have time sometimes to fill out the online survey. Quite a few of them also said that they were affected by COVID themselves or someone in their family, so they were not able to focus on online surveys. So about 15 to 20% we had to call and fill out the survey, and they were nice enough to answer our questions on the phone. So we had a mix of methodologies there. So just a brief review of what we have in the literature. We know that micro enterprises are especially vulnerable to shocks. They have a narrow range of coping mechanisms, fallback options, and especially there's some literature on natural disasters and how small businesses respond to natural disasters, and there's evidence from the region, specifically from India, that small businesses are more prone to liquidity crisis, and they have less technical and financial capacities to respond to natural crises or any shock. The growing sector for this informal variant of e-commerce in Bangladesh, that's how CDAP has termed this sector. They're e-commerce, but it's an informal variant. In Bangladesh and in many other Asian countries, it's particularly dominated by women, which is an interesting feature because obviously the barriers to entry is very low when you can do these businesses from home. When COVID started, the other researchers also started working on this sector. So, and specifically on startups and online businesses, we have data from Innovation, for example, showing that, micro merchants in Bangladesh will face a shortage of working capital post-pandemic. And most of these businesses rely on personal savings for investment. And we also see in another study from Light Castle Partners that 1 in 4 startups in Bangladesh have shut down their businesses by July 2020. Now, startups is a slightly different sample from the sample that we have, but interestingly, we have very similar results from this study. 1 in 4, a quarter of the businesses that we followed had closed down by our second round. So I'll get more into that. but let me just describe very briefly the kind of businesses and entrepreneurs that we are talking about. There are more details in the papers that we have published, but just to give you a basic idea, the entrepreneurs that we reached out to are very young, 21 to 30 years old, and educated. Most of them have higher education, at least university and or even more. So this is a young, educated group of entrepreneurs. Now, if you look at the left panel, you see that we asked the entrepreneurs if they have, if this is their main occupation. And we find that if you look at the bottom, that major part, 57.4% of them said that this is their only source of income. They are strictly there full-time working on these enterprises. And we find others have, other jobs or other businesses or are homemakers, and this is a part-time income earning source for them. About 30% said that, their income from this online business contributed more than 40% of their household income. So that's quite a bit. When we talk about the businesses, so the business characteristics is a little, because we purposefully selected pages that are targeted to women and are operated by women. About 48% of the businesses in our sample were selling clothing, and there were some other products such as food items, food, bakery, fashion accessories, cosmetics, stationery, etc. And in terms of employees, these are very small micro enterprises, and typically they have very small number of people working for them. 34% didn't have any employees. These were one-man show kind of enterprises. 42% had 1 to 5 employees, and only 19% had 6 to 20. So these are very small enterprises where the entrepreneur herself manages everything, starting from production to sales. About 60% were involved in at least some processing or manufacturing of the products that they sell, and 20 to 30% were just doing trading, meaning that they were buying offline and selling online. So that's the basic characteristic of the people that we are talking about. So now let's get to our second round. So when we followed up the 122 entrepreneurs that we talked to in the first round, in the second round, we found that 24% had closed their operations permanently. 27% had closed down temporarily during the beginning, March, April, when there was strict lockdown. But then afterwards, before Eid, they restarted their operation. So this sort of assures our hypothesis that these are the kinds of businesses that are able to very quickly scale down and very quickly scale up, given the nature of the platforms that they use. And 49% actually continued operations, even when the business was really going slow. They were active, they continued. Now, if you look at the right panel, we're looking at the composition of the types of businesses for the ones that had closed down. And on the left, we have the composition for the ones that were still open. And the main difference that we find is that it was mostly the entrepreneurs who were selling fashion accessories that went out of business. A greater proportion of them went out of business, which makes sense because this is the non-essential item. Clothings, we still had, 51% of the businesses that stayed open were selling clothing. So this is expected. And in the ones that stayed open, we had few very interesting cases. There were some entrepreneurs who quickly switched their product range. The ones that were very early on able to switch, from selling clothes to selling things like masks and sanitizers, they did very well. Actually, they saw their business growing at that time. The ones who were selling food, homemade food and bakery, they also did very well because during the time of lockdown, a lot of people ordered food online. The pages that stayed open also saw an increase in their customer engagement on their pages because Facebook reports how many people are engaging on their posts, and they saw a rise in engagement. And this also makes sense because at this time people were staying home and spending more time on social media and looking at these pages that with posts of products that they were selling. So this sort of confirms the findings from other studies that about a quarter goes out of business. Now, if we zoom in a little bit on, who closed down, who are these 24% businesses that closed down, and we find that compared to the businesses that stayed open, businesses that closed, entrepreneurs who decided to close down their online business, a larger portion of them had other sources of income. Actually, more than 50% of them said this was not their main source of income. So this was more of a side income earning activity. And once, in the first month or so, they saw that they were making losses, they quickly decided to shut down their business and dedicate more time on their other income earning activities. So it looks like people who have other better options were more likely to shut this specific online business down. And these businesses, the closed businesses, were also relatively much smaller in terms of their recurring costs, their overhead costs, and the number of employees that they have. So if it's a single entrepreneur who doesn't have employees dependent on this business, then it's easier for her to shut it down without any formalities or other complications. So that's the nature of the businesses that basically closed down. Now let's think about the resilience. We started to think about resilience and what the entrepreneurs' perceptions were about how they're going to recover from this shock. So we find that in the first round, we saw a lot of uncertainty. In April, the entrepreneurs were not really sure about what's coming, how this is going to unfold, this crisis. Is there going to be strict lockdown or not? Because that affected their business. So we saw less confidence in, if they were going to overcome the shock. In June, by June, basically, we saw more confidence. People who knew that they were not going to make it, they were very sure. People who knew that they were going to make it, they were very sure. So as the situation unfolded, and then the new normal became clearer to entrepreneurs, they were able to adjust their expectations. And we see that, more or less entrepreneurs who are in business still, they're thinking that within a year or so, they will recover back to the state that they were in before COVID hit. So there seems to be quite a high level of confidence, which is why we named this second round as knockdown, but up again. So these enterprises will hopefully bounce back quite quickly. We asked respondents how confident they were and what the impact of COVID was on their business. If you see the second point, respondents that said that there was a negative impact on their business had dropped a little bit by June. In April, 95% said that they were negatively impacted, but by June, the number was 87, still very high, but 87%. In June, the number of entrepreneurs who said that they were positively impacted by COVID had also increased a little bit. In June, 5% said that they were positively impacted. And as I explained earlier, these were mostly businesses who adapted their product base depending on the new demands, and also enterprises who sell food, essential services. We asked about revenue earnings, and even though enterprises have sustained and they're operating and they're confident, that doesn't mean that they're not worse off than before. We asked them to compare how much they had made last year during the two peak seasons, during Pohila Boishakh and Eid al-Fitr, and a majority of them said that they had made much lower earnings compared to last year, which is expected. So there is a depressed demand in the sector as well, even if there are some advantages of being online. Now we thought of some knock-on effects or spillover effects, if you may say. So out of the 122 entrepreneurs that we had, they had between them 668 employees full-time working for them. In the first round, we asked them, this was just the beginning of COVID-19, and we asked them within 1 month, how many employees will you have to lay off? Because now you don't have any income. And in the first round, they had predicted that 193 people would have to lose their jobs if things didn't improve within the first month. And very surely by the second round, we found that 121 employees had been laid off between April and June. And if we take this prediction to be quite close to accurate, then the entrepreneurs predict that if the markets, the demand and the operations of the markets don't resume back to what it used to be, then another more than 500 staff will have to be let go in the next 3 months. So this is yet to be tested. Maybe hopefully if we can follow up later, we'll see if this actually takes place. In terms of coping mechanisms, so at the beginning in April, we found that entrepreneurs were still unsure of what's going to happen. So they were just doing damage control. They were canceling their orders. They were, laying off a few employees, just the ones that could be, they were more disposable, and they were giving some discounts to encourage people to buy. In the second round, we found them more proactive, proactively giving discounts, and they were canceling less orders. So this sort of indicates, as we said, they were confident that they were going to recover. So their coping mechanisms reflected that. We also saw that a lot of them switched to mobile payments systems for delivering to customers and taking payments. And in the first round, we found 88%, more than 88% did cash on delivery, whereas in the second round that more of them were taking payments by bKash because of the nature of the crisis and the preference for contactless payment. We asked about the kind of support that these entrepreneurs have. On the right panel, we look at financial, and as expected, 68% of these entrepreneurs depend on personal finances. They finance their own businesses, and when the shock hit, they're financing out of their own savings. Now, this is a dominantly informal sector. Enterprises, 65% have no formal registration or trade license, which means they don't have access to merchant accounts on bKash or access to formal loans. 19% of them have loans from family and friends. And when in our in-depth interviews, when we asked them about these issues, they said, well, they rely completely on friends and family for loans and support, and this has worked for them so far. But if the crisis is prolonged, if it goes on for much longer, then of course these personal savings and resources from friends and families will run out. So far they are able to manage, but if the crisis continues, then they will face some problems. We were also interested in the non-financial support that businesses need. These are online entrepreneurs, and we were interested in their engagement with the online community, which is also emerging in Bangladesh. And we found that there was a high engagement on online platforms. A lot of them said that the guidance and advice for their business comes from mentors that they have online, people that they don't know personally, but on forums, different kinds of platforms, there are discussions, other entrepreneurs similar to them who discuss issues. And that's where they get their business ideas or advice and support. A lot of them actually, as we mentioned at the beginning, this is a very educated and young group of people. And a lot of them attended and watched closely webinars that have, we have a proliferation of webinars since COVID-19. So they watched these webinars and specifically on business related issues. And they've benefited, quite a bit of them have benefited from the kind of discussions that happen in these webinars, and they seek support and resources from these sources as well. Now, very quickly, I don't want to take much longer, but in the first round, we got some indication about, these women facing some struggles at home, because we all know this crisis has been particularly difficult because a lot of households had to let go of their house help. So, and women had to take on more housework, which affected their work life, both women who do business and other jobs. And so there was a lot of frustration, we all know, from people around us. So we got that sense in the first round. So in the second round, we added questions about time use and also mental health. So as expected, we find, if you look at the panel on the left, household chores, the time spent on household chores has gone up quite a bit since the first round in April. We asked the question, how much time did you spend on this activity before lockdown, and how much did you have to spend on this activity after lockdown? So before lockdown, these women spent around 2.5 hours on household chores, for instance, in a day, but after lockdown, they had to spend almost 4 hours. So that's increased quite a bit. And this meant that they had to compromise on some other activities. So if you look at study, office work, if you look at running business, so that's where they had to cut down on time that they could spend on these activities because of the demands of household chores. Quite a few women also talked about how much time they had to spend on care work, because a lot of them had family members who were affected by COVID, and they had to dedicate quite a bit of time taking care of patients, infected people. So if it wasn't themselves, so that also affected time that they could spend on their businesses. For mental health assessment, we used the assessment, quick assessment questions that Johns Hopkins guidelines recommend. And we find that the mental health symptoms are quite significant, as we had expected from our conversations in the first round. So if you look at the panels from left to right, we have about 60%, more than 60% women felt nervous or anxious for more than 3 days every week. We have depression is also very common. And if you look at the rightmost column that had any physical reaction, that's a serious symptom of depression or mental health. So we have about 30% of women who said that they had physical reaction to stress and anxiety for more than 3 days of the week. So this has implications because this affects productivity. This affects how much time and effort and creativity these women can, dedicate to running their businesses and recovering from the shock. So that's why we thought this was important. So in the second round, we had questions on this. So in general, when we talk about resilience, we wanted to look at, how flexible and adaptable these online businesses are. And we found that they are, as expected, they are capable of sustaining, even if their revenues are less, they had to lay off employees, but most of them, a majority of them are still in operation and hopeful of recovering. The main area of vulnerability that we found was the fact that they have no formal financial support. So they don't have access to finance other than their personal savings and friends and families. So this is a vulnerability that's specifically relevant if the crisis continues. And also this issue around, how much time, effort, and focus they're able to have in running their businesses that is affected by the demands of household chores and also their mental health status. So just in conclusion, our hypothesis about flexibility and adaptability of these businesses, I think, were mostly correct. We expected some businesses to close down temporarily, open up, change their product range, respond to the market, and they did that. Most of them did that. A quarter of businesses shut down, but we found that, as I said, these were not women who relied on these businesses to a great extent as an income source. Financial inclusion is an issue, and there's a knock-on effect. There's a significant effect on employment, we felt, and these women were rightly able to predict how many people they would be able to keep on, and how many people they had to let go if the crisis continued. But there's a high level of confidence, which is good news. And there's a lot of engagement in online groups and forums. So there's an online community that supports and sustains these entrepreneurs that's emerging. And as mentioned already, that mental health and work-life balance is a challenge for these women because they're home-based. Some women said that, rightly that, because they work online and they're home-based, a lot of their family members or friends do not consider or do not recognize that they have a full-time business that they're running and they need to dedicate time on this. So that affects their productivity. So this was basically, in a nutshell, a research. For more details, we have 2 policy briefs that we have published on our website on the 2 rounds of survey. So if you're interested in more details, please do check these out. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Mehnaz. It's a very interesting presentation, and I hope there'll be lots of questions. And the PowerPoint will also be available on the website if anybody wants a copy later. I'd now like to ask the panelists, our designated panelists, to make their comments, after which we'll open up the floor for questions. Selima Appa has joined us. So Selima Appa, a lot of you know, is an honorable member of parliament and also the founder and the president of the Bangladesh Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and has been, very, very active in enabling women entrepreneurship to be where it is in the country right now. So I'm very glad that she could join us. So Selima Appa, about 10 minutes, and then we'll hand over to Nashiba.
Thank you all. I think you are testing my entrepreneurship skill, because I have never been asked or has been informed that I'll be a discussant or a panelist. But
sorry.
But this is my subject. I love it. I fully involved in it. And let me first congratulate about the paper. But I think first, actually, we have to look into that who are these entrepreneurs we are talking about? Because at this moment, 2 things are very important. Because I have seen, according to the presentation, the respondents, 65% respondents are without trade license. So I think this should have been taken care. Because when we would like to proceed on, when we would like to move on, we need to talk with the entrepreneur who has legal license, formal license. Otherwise, if you would like to lobby, if you would like to do the advocacy, then it becomes very difficult. Informal things are informal, and formal things can, proceed on. So I think the research should have been that the respondent should be at least 70% should be who has trade license, and 30% should be who doesn't have trade licenses. Then actual scenario would have been come, because I work mainly to see that women entrepreneurs have formal trade license, because otherwise the recognition, otherwise the disparity which we have in the society or in the business community or with the government, ultimately we will not reach to our goal, because the disparity will exist when we are always continuing as an informal sector, which are women entrepreneurs. That is one thing I would like to ask, and I would like to see that, the BRAC, whenever you do this sort of studies, or if you're interested to see the entrepreneurship grows in our country, then these need to be taken care. Second, also, in this COVID situation, because as we are talking about this pandemic situation, the beauty parlor sector has not been highlighted very much, because this is a sector which has been totally affected, because who has taken their services even online? Because other sectors, food, clothing, at least little or to some extent online services has been taken. But beauty parlor has been totally devastated. So these sectors should have been highlighted, because in Bangladesh, there are millions actually are involved. As an employee, the women are employed in the beauty parlor sector, and a huge revenue government also earns from VAT and taxes from the beauty parlor sector. So this is this should be a sector where we can really beat our own drum, because this sector has given so much revenue to the government, and now they are unable to do so. So this, if we could highlight this, then proceedings and the entrepreneurship development becomes much more easier. So I think this is also another thing which has been missed in this paper. One of the things I don't know whether it has been discussed in the paper. Maybe I missed it, but about the stimulus package. We know the government has given a stimulus package, but we also have seen that there's nothing. We have studied, we have gone through it, we are sleeping over it to see that anything is there for the women entrepreneurs. There are boxes where there's mentioned men and women, but when you see according to even in the Bangladesh Bank circular, if you see ko, kho, go, gho, omo, you will not see anywhere it has been mentioned women entrepreneurs. They have mentioned dustho mohila. So women entrepreneurs cannot be treated or cannot be seen as a dustho mohila. These are women who are coming into the economic arena for economic empowerment, for women's empowerment, for gender equality, and also to give a sort of a sustainability to the government, to Bangladesh economy. So we have to talk, we have to see, and we have to, bring this within our paper or within our activities. So nothing, even the government has not been very, I should say, successful bringing about the women entrepreneurs issues and problems and in the stimulus package. So I think this is a high time that we should start seeing and study the stimulus package. This is a high time we should see that how the women entrepreneurs who has been into beauty parlor or other sectors can diversify, because diversification is very important. And I have seen also in this paper that these women entrepreneurs, mostly because they are informal, so mostly money they have taken from the relatives or from informal sources. But we also need to talk about the women entrepreneurs, billions of women entrepreneurs who has trade licenses, who has taken bank loan. Now they are much more in a liable condition because they have given mortgages, maybe of their lands, maybe of their products, and now they can't pay their bank loans. So what will happen to them? So we need to talk about them also. So many things has been missed in this paper. That, you know, we always say that human part is missing. So I think the entrepreneurship part is very much missing. I fully agree, and I fully congratulate and appreciate about the paper, but many things has come up. But that touch is very much missing, because this paper will not take forward for solving the crisis of women entrepreneurs in this pandemic. I would request, after this discussion, something should be there where we can take it as a document and lobby to the government that this is a research has been done. This is the case of the women entrepreneurs who has taken bank loan. Now they need bank loan because we are asking for 2% bank interest with the government. That's the lobbying we are doing it. So how we can argue with it? If we have a paper like this, where all these data are there, that these are the women entrepreneurs who has mortgaged their land. These are the women entrepreneurs who used to have 10 employees or 20 employees. These are the women entrepreneurs who has a trade license and doing business for 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. But now they are in nowhere. So then it will be easier for us as an advocate, as a lobbyist, whatever you say, to talk with the government, to lobby the government. Even as I am a member of parliament, I can put it into the parliament also. So although this is the opening, that at least we have something about the women entrepreneurs, but we need to see that access to resources are very important now for the women entrepreneurs. Diversification, as I said earlier, is very important. And of course, the capacity building are very important to fight not only against COVID, but to see and to bring opportunities into the new arena. And now also connecting the educated startups who are into ICT, and also with the informal sector women entrepreneurs. So linking these entrepreneurs are also very important in this situation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salimapa. That was very useful. I think, you know, this debate of formality, informality will continue in the question answer, because probably these are entrepreneurs who couldn't or didn't know how to become formal or face the barriers. So these are things that we need to discuss. And these are also, this is a different kind of entrepreneurship, which, for example, the BWCCI may reach out to and try and include, so that they become more integrated into mainstream business, if that is what they want to do. So
I'll just throw one thing I would like to request, that
sure.
When you meet, whenever the researcher or whenever Brac meet this entrepreneur, ask them to make a trade license, because making a trade license is not a tough job. So ask them to make a trade license, because that is the identity. You know, like we have a birth certificate, we have a national ID. Without that, you are lost. So this also need to be, taken care of. Thank you again.
Right. So yes, it is an identity, and which they can use for also getting their various rights. So we'll continue the discussion. So now, and sorry, Salimapa, if we hadn't made it clear that we really wanted you as a discussant, but thank you for jumping in anyway.
Thank you, as always.
Thank you. So Nashiba, kindly, if you would come in and give us your comments.
Yes, thank you, Mahinappa and Salimappa. Good to see you. And thank you so much. I mean, your comments are always very structured. So I'll try to follow your example and give some structured thoughts on the paper. So Mianaz and the team, I think this was an excellent piece of work. And as Ms. Elimap also said, a very good starting point. And I congratulate the team of being able to do this in a short period of time and with all the different restrictions and limitations we have right now with the lockdown. I want to start off and I'll try to keep my 10 minutes. Hopefully just Mahinappa, just give me a flag, heads up if I'm running over time, and I'll wrap it up. So I want to start off with a couple of clarifications that I thought was important when we're discussing this particular piece of study. I particularly think this is very interesting because this is talking about a very specialized group of women entrepreneurs and basically the online platform, which in all the different studies or work that we've been doing across the development field, whether it's through the development partners or people such as BWCCI and others or Brac, has really not done a focused study on the online platform or the online women entrepreneurs. And with online women entrepreneurs, I think along with all the challenges that, some of them which Elimap already flagged, I mean, one of the biggest ones being the trade license, with online, there are some added advantages and disadvantages. So this study, I think, is not so much about looking at overall women entrepreneurs or the kind of issues they face in general or during the pandemic, but looking at a very specialized group of women entrepreneurs who are primarily online. And if I understood correctly from the paper, primarily through Facebook that they're doing their business. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second point I want to make is basically talking about this whole issue about, trade license and informal versus formal. Now, I would like to ask the research team whether they've had any discussion when they did the surveys on the women entrepreneur or the business getting a trade license. And from my personal interactions with many of the women entrepreneurs online, especially through Facebook, I've gotten mixed messages, one is that, of course, they would like to get the trade license, which opens up all these different, access and advantages, including loans and etc. that Selimapa already has mentioned very clearly. But there's also some that who don't really want to make it formal. So they would prefer to just use the say Facebook and because we have to understand the women who are selling online in this particular platform are not necessarily, the typical poor rural or poor urban woman who wants to set up a business and needs the working capital. So my question is whether the issue of not having enough working capital is as acute with this particular group of people as opposed to most women entrepreneurs that we often discuss. So that's something that I would like to see if this has been taken forward, because the trade license is one of the key challenges and is discussed by anybody who works in this field, whether it's Salimapa or whether it's ADB projects or whether it's BIDD work. This is the first thing that anybody who works in this field will talk about is access to trade license and why it's needed and what kind of opportunities it's opening. So that's one issue that I thought would be interesting to take up further if this study goes in a third or fourth round. Before I go into, I want to make one last point on this particular topic, and then I want to move on to some of the secondary impacts, so to speak, that you've highlighted in the study. So before I go into that, again, in this study or in the follow-up studies, it would be very interesting to look at two more things in more depth. I mean, you have touched on it in this study. One is this switching to the mobile payment system and financial inclusion. Whether they're willing to do it, what are some of the challenges they would face, whether that would be good or bad for business, etc. Because especially this COVID-19 and some of the information that's coming out is that this is here to stay and it's not going away anytime soon. So we will see a new normal where, online businesses or e-commerce platform will become more and more important now, ever more important now than before. That's one point. And the last point in this particular area is about the ICT and technological transformation. You mentioned this in the paper in sort of not in passing, but not in depth. And I want to just know that if you're planning, and of course, understanding that this is a limited study, only 122 women entrepreneurs, only through Facebook, and it's not supposed to represent the whole situation or come up with, you know, the overall impact. But from your discussions in the 2 rounds, how do you see beyond, you know, doing business on Facebook or beyond getting a more mobile payment system up and running, what would this ICT or technological transformation mean for this particular group of women, and what kind of support would they be needing, whether it's from the government point of view or even from development partners? So that's my first set of comments. Going into now some of the secondary impacts, which understandably doing this kind of a survey and asking questions on the phone is not necessarily ideal, but I would also like to see a bit more information if there's another round or if this has been taken forward on the impact, the unpaid care and domestic work that you've mentioned, and the work-life balance, and how this has been exacerbated by this COVID-19, where, you know, and I liked your anecdotes that I saw in the paper about how saying that when you're, I mean, as it is, if you're in the formal sector and you're now working from home, at least for most of us, it is more justifiable to say, oh, I have work office from 9 to 5, so I'm not able to do these housework. But for a home-based owner who already had a double burden, who already had to deal with this unpaid care and domestic work and had to do their business from home, with the COVID-19 and more people staying at home, more elderly to be taken care of, etc., it has become further, I mean, it's worsened, as you've already mentioned in the paper. But is there any, in a second or in a third or fourth round, would there be any opportunities to look at how to deal with this, coming up with some, you know, innovative solutions? Or, I mean, that's just an area that I think that needs to be explored a lot more if we are going to talk about women entrepreneurs being successful in this pandemic period. Lastly, it's about the violence against women. Again, I mean, it's not really part of this, you know, not necessarily the mandate of this particular study or what you're looking at, but it may be useful to also look at whether there is any linkages. Of course, there's linkages with staying at home and an increased violence against women. We don't need to, you know, this has already been explored quite a bit regionally, I mean, globally, and also in the context of Bangladesh. But I would be interested to see whether there's any linkages with the women, you know, earning the money, because I'm thinking if there's a pandemic going on right now and the men, a lot of the formal sector jobs, especially for men, or informal sector jobs for the men is gone. So they're not earning anymore and they're staying at home. Whereas the woman is still, even if there is been a reduction in income, as you've shown, but they're still selling some stuff and they're still earning some money. So whether this creates any further tensions or what kind of dynamics it ends up presenting within the household. And I think I will stop there. I think that, those are all my points. I hope I stayed within time. I'll stop there. Thank you.
You did. Thank you, Nashiba. Thank you for doing that. Now we have a little more than half an hour for question answer. And I think both of the panelists brought up a number of very important points, which I hope Mehnaz and her team will answer. Maybe before we move to the panelists' point, Mehnaz, there are some questions in the question and answer box. Can you see them or should I read them out?
I can see, if you can pick out the ones that you want me to answer.
Well, one is from the television DBC, which they would like you to answer in Bangla. So if you could answer that. And then, you know, overall, there are some questions around the different peaks in sales, the different, if you could pick up, there are questions around these issues of formality, informality, what are the different advantages and disadvantages and barriers. And there was another question on female entrepreneurs that Facebook targeted. Do we have any kind of count of, you know, how many women are using, I think, if I understand the question, that are using the Facebook platform? Then there are questions around the stimulus package. did any of your respondents know about or have access to the stimulus package? So maybe starting off with the DBC question.
DBC প্রশ্নটা exactly কি ছিল?
যে করোনা আঘাতের কত শতাংশ নারী উদ্যোক্তা তাদের ব্যবসা বন্ধ করে দিতে বাধ্য হয়েছিলেন, তারপর করোনা সংকট থেকে ঘুরে দাঁড়াতে কত শতাংশ নারী উদ্যোক্তা ব্যাংক বা আর্থিক প্রতিষ্ঠান থেকে ঋণ নিয়েছিলেন বা ঋণ চেয়েও পাননি, এবং 3 নম্বর গবেষণায় অংশ নেওয়া উদ্যোক্তারা সংকট কাটিয়ে উঠতে কি ধরনের সহায়তা চান?
আচ্ছা, তো আমাদের রিসার্চ রেজাল্ট যেটা বলছে আমাদের স্যাম্পলে 24% উদ্যোক্তা ব্যবসা বন্ধ করে দিতে হয়েছে এপ্রিল থেকে জুনের মধ্যে। এনাদের মধ্যে কেউই আমরা জিজ্ঞেস করেছিলাম ব্যাংকের লোন বা এনজিও লোন নিয়েছেন কিনা, এখানে খুব কম মনে হয় 10%-এর আগে থেকে লোন ছিল এরকম কিছু, কিন্তু বেশিরভাগ ওনারা বলেছেন ওনাদের পরিবার এবং পরিচিত মানুষদের কাছ থেকেই ওনারা টাকা ধার করেছেন এই সময়টায়, ফর্মাল সোর্সে ওনারা যাননি। আর কোপিং মেকানিজম যেগুলো আমরা বললাম যে ওনারা প্রথম দিকে কিছুটা একটু সাবধান ছিলেন কারণ ওনারা বুঝতে পারছিলেন না যে এটা কি হবে সামনে, তখন তারা মোটামুটি তাদের যেসব অর্ডার দেয়া ছিল সেগুলা অর্ডার ক্যান্সেল করেছেন, কিছু কর্মচারী তারা বাদ দিয়েছেন, এভাবে কিছুদিন ছিলেন। জুনে এসে আমরা দেখেছি যে যারা টিকে ছিলেন তাদের মধ্যে কনফিডেন্সটা অনেক বেশি ছিল, তাদের কোপিং মেকানিজমের একটা বড় অংশ ছিল তারা অনেক পণ্য তারা ডিসকাউন্ট দিচ্ছিলেন, যাতে যেহেতু এখন মানুষ বেশি কেনাকাটা করছেন না, এই কেনাকাটাটা বাড়ানোর জন্য মানুষকে একটু উদ্বুদ্ধ করার জন্য তারা অনেক ধরনের স্ট্র্যাটেজি অনলাইন ডিসকাউন্ট দিচ্ছেন, এনকারেজ করছেন তাদের জিনিসগুলো বিক্রি করার জন্য। তো এই ধরনের কোপিং মেকানিজম তারা বলেছেন। আর আরেকটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ বিষয় হলো তারা অনলাইন যেসব প্ল্যাটফর্ম আছে, অনলাইন যেসব ফোরাম আছে যেখানে অন্যান্য মহিলা উদ্যোক্তারা অনেক ধরনের আলোচনা করেন, ওনাদের এক্সপিরিয়েন্স শেয়ার করেন, অনেকে আছেন যারা মেন্টর, সেলিমা আপার মতো অনেকে আছেন যারা এইসব ফোরামে কথা বলেন, অনেক ধরনের অ্যাডভাইস দেন, এই যে ট্রেড লাইসেন্সের ব্যাপারগুলো, এসব অনলাইন কমিউনিটিতে এই এন্টারপ্রেনাররা কিন্তু খুব মনোযোগ দিয়ে অংশগ্রহণ করেন এবং এখান থেকে ওনারা অনেক ধরনের সাপোর্ট পান। আমি maybe I'll answer panelists their question gulo, issues gulo, maybe I'll address a little bit and then answer some of the questions. So Selma, thank you very much for showing up. I know we sent you a request very much at the last moment, but it is, I think our discussion and this presentation has been very much enriched because of your presence. You are very right about the fact that this is not about formal. It's not about the formal sector. This research is very, it's focused on a very small part of female entrepreneurs, the whole spectrum that you work with. Informal, in this sector, online informal female entrepreneurs, which are different from e-commerce platforms, is an up and rising sector in Asia. There's some work that CGAP, World Bank is doing, and they've been having a conversation, they consider this as an emerging sector, and especially important because this sector has no barrier to entry, which is particularly attractive for women, especially who are home-based, and have very little access to formal information, formal processes, such as going out and getting a trade license and being able to be mobile and interact with the outside world. So interestingly, in places like Afghanistan, Myanmar, this is a very fast emerging sector, and CGAP calls this sector the sector that is hidden in plain sight, because we all are now very familiar with shopping online, Facebook pages, we are all using this. It's in plain sight, but it's not, because it's not formal, it's not considered in formal advocacy and formal, there's very little research that's been done so far. So that's particularly why we were interested in doing this research, not for advocacy reasons. We were interested to understand this sector as an emerging sector. This is a new way of working for women, a new opportunity. So you're very correct in saying we cannot use this to advocate to the government or claim rights for these women. We thought it was important to first understand this sector a little bit because there's so little on it. So I very much appreciate your comment, and hopefully in the future we can do more extensive work which will be more representative and which can actually be used for policy advocacy. You were correct about, we didn't cover any of the services like beauty parlors. So we focused only on Facebook pages, specifically for clothing, fashion accessories, very small businesses that were selling products, a lot of them reselling products. So this does not cover any of the service sector. So beauty parlors or anyone who has, so I think very few of these pages had physical outlets. Most of them didn't. So they don't have any physical presence. They don't have any trade license. So we wanted to focus on this because they are typically left out of wider studies that we do on female entrepreneurs. I agree that there, this does mean that there's no way of advocating for them to have access to the stimulus package that we are hearing about. And the women that we talk to, they are very aware. They know that they're not eligible for the stimulus package, which is why they turn to their online community for support. They are very aware that they do not qualify for formal support. And they also are aware of the fact that the stimulus package is very much biased towards male entrepreneurs. A few of them did mention that, even if there's scope, our male counterparts will get help before we do, because this sector, there's a general perception that these women are just doing this out of, it's a hobby, it's a part-time thing, they're just sitting at home and doing it. Even their families don't acknowledge that this is a business and it's bringing in income, and it takes time to manage and operate. So they're very aware of that, and it's interesting that you brought it up. There was a question, Nashiba, you asked about why these entrepreneurs don't get trade licenses. I think just by the nature of the entrepreneurs, you see, these are women who are home-based. They chose not to go out and do businesses that take more mobility and interaction for various reasons. It might be that they don't have time, they have other jobs as well, or they have mobility issues. So just by that nature and characteristics, I imagine that these women have less access to formal process. Getting a trade license does involve putting in some time and effort. A lot of them mentioned that trade licenses require commercial addresses, which they do not have because they hardly have a one room dedicated to their businesses. So they don't have these formal documentations that they would require, even very basic documentations that they would require to get a trade license. So that's the perception, and because it's the entry into the sector is so easy and costless, they prefer not to. But some did have trade licenses. We had, about 30%, 35% had trade licenses, and about a few of them did have formal establishments. They had manufacturing units, even if it's small workshops, they call workshops or studios and physical outlets. So as I said, these are very educated young people who have access to a lot of online resources. So the feeling we got was that they're very aware of what facilities are available and what are not available, and it's a choice that they make based on these the various restrictions and barriers that they have. Another question you had was around the working capital, if that is a constraint.
We could mix Bangla English মিশিয়ে বলবেন।
আচ্ছা হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে, সরি একটা বলা শুরু করে ওটার ফ্লোতে চলে আসে। ওয়ার্কিং ক্যাপিটাল অন্যান্য মহিলা উদ্যোক্তাদের তুলনায় এখানে এটা বেশি প্রকট কিনা এটা বলা মুশকিল আসলে। রিসার্চ আমরা যদি কম্প্যারিজন না করি, আমাদের স্যাম্পলে যেহেতু কম্প্যারিজন গ্রুপ ছিল না, আমরা যদি সুযোগ পাই, সুবিধা যদি ওরকম হয়, আমাদের ইচ্ছা আছে আমরা যদি অনলাইন অফলাইন বিভিন্ন সেক্টরে বিভিন্ন সাইজের ফিমেল এন্টারপ্রেনারদের নিয়ে যদি আমরা সার্ভেটা করতে পারতাম, তাহলে আমরা একটা তুলনা করে দেখা যেত যে কাদের আসলে কোন কনস্ট্রেনিং ফ্যাক্টরটা বেশি ইম্পর্টেন্ট। ওয়ার্কিং ক্যাপিটাল আসলে একটা রেস্ট্রিক্টিং ক্যাপিটাল। এখানে আমাদের যেহেতু কম স্যাম্পল ছিল, এটা আমাদের বলা মুশকিল। আসলে আমার বলা উচিত হবে না, যদিও আমার নিজের কিছু আন্দাজ হয়তো থাকতে পারে। আরেকটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট কোয়েশ্চেন ছিল যে আসলে ফেসবুক পেজ এরকম আছে কয়টা। এটা আসলে আমরা জানি না। এটা হয়তো ফেসবুক অফিসিয়ালি খোঁজ নিলে হয়তো পাওয়া যেতে পারে, আমি ঠিক জানি না। কিন্তু আসলে বাংলাদেশে এরকম কোনো হিসাব নাই যে ফেসবুকে এরকম কয়টা মহিলা ব্যবসা করছেন, এরকম ছোট উদ্যোক্তা। সো আমাদের আসলে স্যাম্পলিং পপুলেশনটা আমাদের জানা নেই। আমরা নিয়েছি 100টা আন্দাজ করে, জাস্ট একটা ধারণা করার জন্য। সো এটা আসলে কত রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ এই অনলাইন ফিমেল এন্টারপ্রেনারদের, সেটাও আমরা কিন্তু খুব জোরদারভাবে বলতে পারছি না, কারণ কয়টা আছে, কয়জন আছেন আমরা ঠিক শিওর না। মোবাইল ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল ইনক্লুশন আর আইসিটি রিলেটেড যে প্রশ্নটা, কমেন্টটা নাসিবা করলেন, এটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট। আসলে আমাদের বিআইডিটিতে একটা খুব স্পেসিফিক ইন্টারেস্ট, আমাদের গবেষণা করার ইচ্ছা আছে, সেটা হলো এই আইসিটি রিলেটেড, আইসিটি ইনেবলড এন্টারপ্রাইজ। এই মহিলা উদ্যোক্তারা অনলাইন প্ল্যাটফর্মে কাজ করছে, অবশ্যই এটা আইসিটি এনেবলড, কিন্তু এছাড়াও আরো অনেক সুযোগ আছে আইটি ইউজ করে এই ব্যবসাগুলোকে আরো জোরদার করা। যেমন ধরেন এই ব্যবসাগুলো আমরা দেখছি বেশিরভাগই ওনারা একা কাজ করেন, উদ্যোক্তা একা কাজ করেন। উনি প্রোডাকশন বলেন, কাস্টমারের সাথে কথা বলা বলেন, মার্কেটিং বলেন, সবকিছু মানে কমপ্লিট প্রোডাকশন লাইন আনটিল একটা প্রোডাক্ট বানানো থেকে শুরু করে শেষ পর্যন্ত একজনই কিন্তু ইনভলভ থাকে একটা, এবং হিসাব রাখা সবকিছু নিজে করতে হয়। এখানে প্রত্যেকটা ধাপে অনেক সুযোগ আছে আইটি ইউজ করে একটা মানুষের প্রোডাক্টিভিটি, বিজনেসের প্রোডাক্টিভিটি অনেক বাড়ানো। যেরকম খুব সিম্পলি আমরা যদি ইনভেন্টরি ম্যানেজমেন্ট, অ্যাকাউন্টস রাখা, এগুলোর জন্য অনেক অ্যাপস আছে, আইটি এনেবলড অনেক কিছু আছে, প্রোগ্রাম সফটওয়্যার আছে, যেগুলো ইউজ করলে কাজটা অনেক দ্রুত হয়, একজনের পক্ষে অনেকগুলো কাজ ম্যানেজ করা অনেক সহজ হয়ে যায়। এইসব ব্যাপারে যদি আমাদের কোন রকম ইন্টারভেনশন করা যায়, আমরা অ্যাকচুয়ালি নাসিবাকে ধন্যবাদ, উনি অ্যাকচুয়ালি আমাদের পেপারটা পড়েছেন দেখে ওই পয়েন্টটা উনি মেনশন করেছেন। আমরা এইটা একটু বোঝার জন্য আমরা একটু জিজ্ঞেস করেছিলাম আমাদের সার্ভেতে যে এই ধরনের আইটি সলিউশন যদি ওনাদের অফার করা হয়, ওনারা কি ইন্টারেস্টেড হবে কিনা। তো আমাদের 50 to 60% মতো বলেছেন যে হ্যাঁ আমরা ইন্টারেস্টেড হব, কারণ এটা আমাদের ব্যবসা করতে আমাদের একটু সাহায্য করবে, আমার ওয়ার্কলোডটা কমবে, আমার এফিসিয়েন্সি বাড়বে। তো সেই দিক থেকে এটা আসলে আমাদের একটা স্পেশাল ইন্টারেস্ট, কারণ এই ধরনের আইটি এনেবলড সেক্টর যেটা আছে সেখানে আইটি সলিউশনস এর ভূমিকাটা ভবিষ্যতে খুব বেশি আমাদের একটু নজর দিতে হবে এই ব্যাপারটায়, স্পেশালি এই ফিমেল এন্টারপ্রেনারদের। সো থ্যাংক ইউ ফর ব্রিংিং দ্যাট আপ, এটা আমাদের মাথায় ছিল।
We have Imran would like to Imran একটা প্রশ্ন করবে, আর ফ্লোরে আর রাশেদা আপাও আছেন, যদি রাশেদা আপাও কিছু বলতে চান। সো একটু আমরা স্পেস দিতে চাই।
আমি খুব কুইকলি একটা পয়েন্ট, ওই নাসিবা যেটা বললেন যে ওই আনপেইড কেয়ার ওয়ার্ক এন্ড ভায়োলেন্স, ইয়েস these are important issues, কিন্তু আমাদের যে নেচার অফ দ্য মেথোডোলজি, অনলাইন সার্ভে যেটা আসলে মানুষ 20-30 মিনিটের বেশি আনসার করতে পারে না, এটা খুব ইম্পার্সোনাল একটা মেথোডোলজি এবং ফোনে। সো ওটা আমরা এক্সপ্লোর করতে যাইনি, কারণ ওই ইস্যুগুলো নিয়ে বুঝতে হলে আরো আমাদের অন্য মেথড দিয়ে করতে হতো। সো ইটস অ্যান ইম্পর্টেন্ট অ্যাসপেক্ট, বাট আমরা ওটা ধরতে পারিনি। ইমরান ভাই প্রশ্নটা,
সরি টু রাশ ইউ মেহনাজ, কিন্তু সময় কম।
না I was at the end.
ইমরান,
রাইট, আমাকে শোনা যাচ্ছে? আচ্ছা, না আমার আসলে প্রশ্ন না, আমি জাস্ট সবাইকে একটু মানে জানানোর জন্য, কারণ আমাদের এই কাজটার সাথে আমাদের অন্যান্য কিছু কাজের আসলে একটা রিলেশনশিপ আছে এবং সম্পর্ক আছে, আমি জাস্ট এটা বলতে চাচ্ছি, এবং লঙ্গার টার্মে আমরা আসলে এই কাজগুলো কিভাবে নিতে চাই। তো প্রথমত হচ্ছে যে আসলে আউটসেটে বলা যে এটা একটা এক্সপ্লোরেটরি স্টাডি ছিল, সুতরাং এখান থেকে এটার উদ্দেশ্য একটা রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ কোনো একটা ধারণা দেয়া না, এবং আমরা অনেক কাজ করি যেগুলো রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ ধারণা দিতে চাই, যেমন যেটা পিপিআর সিবিআইজিডি মিলে যে সার্ভেটা করলো, কিংবা আমরা এগ্রিকালচারের উপরে কাজ করেছি। আমাদের রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ কিছু কাজ আমরা করি যেখানে আমাদের এই স্যাম্পলটার পপুলেশনটা সম্পর্কে যেখানে আমাদের ক্লিয়ার ধারণা থাকে, সেখানে রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ কাজ আমরা করতে পারি, এবং যেখানে আমাদের ওই ধরনের স্যাম্পল আইডেন্টিফিকেশন একটা স্ট্র্যাটেজি থাকে। এই ক্ষেত্রে কোনো কাজ নেই তেমন, যেটা বললো মেনাজ যেটা বললো। সুতরাং এখানে আমাদের উদ্দেশ্য ছিল একটা নতুন নলেজ জেনারেট করা, একটা সেক্টর, একটা ইমার্জিং সেক্টর সম্পর্কে এই ধরনের একটা এই ধরনের একটা কনটেক্সটে, কোভিড কনটেক্সটে আমরা একটা নতুন একটা এক্সপ্লোরেটরি স্টাডি, এটা একটা এক্সপ্লোরেটরি, এটা সুতরাং ওই সেন্সে নেওয়াটা খুব জরুরি এটা। সুতরাং এখান থেকে যেন আবার ওভার ক্লেম না হয় কোনো কিছু। ওভার ক্লেম কোনো কিছু করা আমাদের মাঝে মাঝে করি অনেক স্টাডি থেকে, আমি সেটা বিআইজির তরফ থেকে খুব ক্লিয়ারলি বলতে চাই, সে ওভার ক্লেমিং যেন আমরা না করি। আমরা রিসার্চের ইন্টিগ্রিটিতে অসম্ভব রকমের বিশ্বাস করি। সুতরাং কিন্তু এখান থেকে অনেকগুলো অত্যন্ত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ফিউচার রিসার্চের স্ট্র্যান্ড আইডিয়াস আলোচনায় অলরেডি এসেছে, যেটা মেনাজ বললো, এবং সেটা নিয়ে আমরা অবশ্যই সামনে কাজ করব। কারণ এই ডিজিটাল স্পেস নিয়ে কাজ করা, ডিজিটাল স্পেসে এন্টারপ্রেনিয়রশিপ, ডিজিটাল স্পেসে নতুন সলিউশন, ডিজিটাল স্পেস নিয়ে বিআইজিডির একটা বড় ধরনের স্ট্র্যাটেজিক রিসার্চ থ্রাস্ট এরিয়া, এবং আমরা অলরেডি কিছু কাজ শুরু করেছি এবং সামনে এটা নিয়ে আমরা আরো অনেক অনেক কাজ করব। সুতরাং যারাই আগ্রহী, এখানে যারা আপনারা আছেন, আমরা আপনার সাথে যোগাযোগ রাখবো, এবং এটা একটা বড় একটা ট্রাস্ট এরিয়া হবে বিআইজিডির জন্য। অলরেডি আমরা কাজ করছি এটাতে। সেকেন্ড, জাস্ট কুইকলি বলা যে আমরা মানে ওভারঅল বাংলাদেশের একটা মাইক্রো স্মল এন্টারপ্রাইজ নিয়ে আলাদা একটা ফোন সার্ভে মাত্র শেষ হয়েছে। ওটারও রেজাল্ট ওটা অনলাইন না, ওটা নানা ধরনের মাইক্রো স্মল এন্টারপ্রাইজ নিয়ে করা হয়েছে। ওখানে বিউটি পার্লার এবং যে ধরনের সেক্টর গুলো আমরা অন্যভাবে চিন্তা করি, সেটা সম্পর্কে আমরা একটা ভালো ধারণা পাবো, রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ একটা ধারণা পাবো। সেটা আমরা আশা করছি কয়েক সপ্তাহের ভেতরেই আমরা সেটা রেজাল্ট আপনাদের সামনে উপস্থাপন করব। অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ।
থ্যাংক ইউ ইমরান পুরা কনটেক্সটে দেওয়ার জন্য। কিন্তু আমি মনে করি এই এক্সপ্লোরেটরি রিসার্চের থেকেও কিন্তু অনেক পলিসি ইমপ্লিকেশন কিন্তু বার হয়ে আসছে। আমার মাথায় অনেক কিছু ঘুরছে, যেগুলি আমরা পরে আশা করি মেহনাজের সাথে আলোচনা করতে পারবো। সেলিমা আপা কিছু বলবেন? জি প্লিজ।
আমি বলতে চাচ্ছি যে আসলে এই কোভিডে আমরা সবচেয়ে বেশি যেটা ফিল করেছি সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের যত এসিবিস গুলি আছে তারা ডিজিটাল স্পেসে না থাকার কারণে কিন্তু তারা যতটুকু ব্যবসা করতে পারতো তারা কিন্তু করতে পারে নাই। ইভেন কম্পিউটার লিটারেসিও কিন্তু নাই। অনেক আমার তো ৭,০০০ আমার ওমেন চেম্বারের মেম্বার, তার মধ্যে হার্ডলি কয়জন কম্পিউটার লিটারেসি। আমি একটা ইমেল পাঠাতে গেলেও এখন সবাই কিন্তু ইমেল পায় না। আমরা 400 কি 500 জন ইমেল মানে রেসপন্ড করে, আর বাকি কিন্তু আমাদের সব হয় SMS করতে হয় আর না হয় চিঠি পাঠাতে হয়। তো সেই জায়গাটাই কিন্তু আসলে আমাদেরকে আরেকটু এই রিসার্চ থেকে যে এন্টারপ্রেনিয়রশিপের যে একটা তো আছে, যারা অলরেডি অনলাইনে যারা আছে তাদেরকে আরো কিভাবে এই ক্রাইসিস থেকে আরো ডেভেলপ করা যায়, কিন্তু অলরেডি যারা এন্টারপ্রেনিয়রশিপের মধ্যে আছে, ব্যবসা বাণিজ্য করছে, তারা এই ডিজিটাল স্পেসে কিভাবে আসতে পারে সেটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট। কারণ এখন কিন্তু জাস্ট ওই বলে না যে হার্ডওয়্যার আর সফটওয়্যার দুটোই লাগবে, কিন্তু এখন শুধু সে ব্যবসা করছি ডিজিটাল একেবারেই আমি যাব না, আমি ফেসবুকেও যাব না, আমি কোনো কিছুতে যাব না, শুধু আমি একটা দোকান নিব, দোকানে আমার প্রোডাক্ট দিয়ে আমি করব, বা আমার সার্ভিস দিব, দোকান করে আমি সার্ভিস করব, সেটাও কিন্তু হয় না। শ্রীলঙ্কায় কিন্তু এখন ইভেন বিউটি পার্লারও কিন্তু অনেক কিছু অনলাইনে হচ্ছে, মানে অনেকের যে হেয়ার ডাই করে, অনেকের পার্সোনাল কেয়ার গুলি, ওরা কিন্তু ওই আমার শ্রীলঙ্কা ওমেন চেম্বারের সাথে কয়েকদিন আগে মিটিং করেছিলাম, ওরা কিন্তু ওই অনলাইনে দেখাচ্ছে, আর যে কাস্টমার সে কিন্তু ওর থেকে দেখে দেখে ওই প্রোডাক্টটা ওরা পাঠিয়ে দিচ্ছে, ও ওইখানে দেখে দেখে ওর সাথে করে হয়তো 100% হচ্ছে না, বাট 50% সার্ভিসটাও কিন্তু সেই ক্লায়েন্টটা নিতে পারছে। তো এই জায়গাটা আমার মনে হয় যদি একটু কাজ করা হয়, যে এই যে এন্টারপ্রেনাররা যারা ডিজিটালে অলরেডি আছে, যাদেরকে নিয়ে রিসার্চ করা হয়েছে, তাদের সাথে সাথে আমরা আরো কিভাবে যুক্ত করতে পারি যারা একেবারে ডিজিটাল প্ল্যাটফর্মে নাই, তাহলে আমার মনে হয় যে আমাদের এগিয়ে যাওয়ার যে আমরা স্বপ্নটা দেখি সেটা বাস্তব হবে। ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে।
থ্যাংক ইউ সেলিমা আপা। রাশেদা আপা আপনি আছেন মনে হয়, আপনি কি কিছু বলবেন? আর সাজ্জাদ ভাইও আছেন। সাজ্জাদ ভাই।
আমি শুনছি কিন্তু বলতে চাচ্ছি না, আমি শুনছি, সরি, আমার জন্য এটা এক্সেল লেসন। ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ। কিন্তু সেলিমা আপা যেটা বললেন সেটা, সেলিমা, এটা কিন্তু প্রণিধানযোগ্য, যেটা বলে আর কি, টু বি কনসিডার্ড। আমরা যেরকম কিন্ডারগার্টেন স্কুলগুলা রেজিস্ট্রেশন করে নাই দেখে কোনো হেল্প করা যাচ্ছে না, একইভাবে ট্রেড লাইসেন্স না করলে গভর্নমেন্টের জন্য নীতিমালার আওতায় নিয়ে আসা সমস্যা হয়ে যায়। আর আরেকটা সেলিমা আরেকটা যেটা বললো ওইটাও বাদ দেয়া, মানে এটার জন্য করা উচিত যে বিউটি পার্লার সেক্টর, এরকম ইনফর্মাল অনেক সেক্টর রয়ে গেছে যেটা আমরা হয়তো একটা স্টাডিতে কভার করতে পারবো না, বাট ইটস এ ভেরি গুড ওয়ান। আই শুড কংগ্রাচুলেট দ্য টিম। ভালো হয়েছে, আমরা একটা দিক নির্দেশনা পেয়েছি, একটা ডিরেকশন পেয়েছি ফর দ্য রেস্ট অফ দ্য এসএমই বা যেটাই বলি সব এমপ্লয়ারদের, এন্টারপ্রেনিয়ারদের যেটাই বলি, তাদের জন্য আরো যদি কিছু বিআইজিটি করতে পারে, দ্যাট উইল বি রিয়েলি সামথিং। কিন্তু ওই যে পলিসি অপশন গুলা নিয়ে পলিসি মেকারদের কাছে বা ডিসিশন মেকারদের কাছে যেতে গেলে আপনাদের ওই যে প্যাকেজিংটা, দ্যাট হ্যাজ টু বি সর্ট অফ, মানে কি বলবো, প্র্যাকটিক্যাল ওরিয়েন্টেড। আমি শুধু এইটাই বলতে চাচ্ছিলাম। ফর এক্সাম্পল যে কথাগুলো সেলিমা বলেছেন আর কি, যে এদেরকে কিভাবে হেল্প করা যায়, যে ট্রেড লাইসেন্স, এটা একটা রেকমেন্ডেশন হিসাবে আসা উচিত। থ্যাংক ইউ, ইটস এ ভেরি গুড স্টাডি, আই হ্যাভ লার্ন সো মাচ, বিকজ এই লাইনে তো আমি কাজ করি না, কিন্তু ইটস এ লেসন ফর মি, পার্টিকুলারলি ইন টার্মস অফ উইমেন্স এমপ্লয়মেন্ট। এবং ওইটাকে নিয়ে কি কিছু করা যায়, যে দুস্থ মহিলা যেটা বললো বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের সার্কুলারের মধ্যে, how could Bangladesh Bank provide such a circular যে দুস্থ মহিলা ক্যাটাগরিতে? It's so demeaning, humiliating.
হ্যাঁ, অন্য দেশে কিন্তু, সরি, ওই স্টিমুলাসে অন্য দেশে কিন্তু উইমেন এন্টারপ্রেনারদের জন্য আলাদা ব্যবস্থা রাখছে। এখানে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক কেন যে রাখলো না,
রাখলো না, দুস্থ মহিলা ক্যাটাগরিটা কেন বলা হলো? আমরা এটা প্রতিবাদ করি।
I don't think entrepreneurদের দুস্থ, ওইখানে আলাদা ক্যাটাগরি ওটা ফর দ্য পভার্টি, ওই ক্যাটাগরির জন্য রেখেছে, which is okay also, কিন্তু that's not everybody. ওরকম স্টিরিওটাইপিং ও is an issue.
এটা আমাদের মানে পলিসি রিকমেন্ডেশনে ইট শুড গো, যে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের সার্কুলারে যে ইটস নট দেয়ার, এবং এটা যে ক্যাটাগরিতে রাখা হয়েছে দ্যাটস মেন্ট ফর সামথিং, সাম আদার ক্যাটাগরি, এটা আর কি।
এক্স্যাক্টলি, এই নিড
সবসময় থাকবে। এখন মেম্বার অফ পার্লামেন্ট হয়েছি, ইলেক্টেড, এখনো ডিসক্রিমিনেশন দেখি বিজনেস কমিউনিটি প্ল্যাটফর্মে। জাস্ট এখানে তো রেকর্ড হচ্ছে, বাট এমনি বলি যে আমি সেদিন বিডার একটা মিটিং এ আমি গিয়েছি, গভর্নিং বোর্ডের আমি মেম্বার, সব চেয়ার করা হয়েছে একটা, মানে এখন তো সোশ্যাল ডিস্টেন্স করে রাখা হবে, তা আমাকে পিছনের সিট দেওয়া হয়েছে। যখন ওখানে ঢুকলাম, আমি যখন দেখলাম আমি, তারপরে সিট একটা সামনে দিল, তখন আমি বললাম আপনি আমাকে দেখে দিচ্ছেন, কিন্তু ওমেন চেম্বারের প্রেসিডেন্টকে আপনি পিছনে বসিয়েছেন, তো আমি পিছনেই বসবো। তো এই যে ডিসক্রিমিনেশনটা, এটা কিন্তু একেবারেই, এতগুলি গভর্নিং বোর্ডের মেম্বার, কাউকে কিন্তু পিছনে চেয়ার দেওয়া হয়নি, ওমেন চেম্বারের প্রেসিডেন্ট পিছনে চেয়ারটা শুধু দেওয়া হয়েছে। সো ইউ সি, মানে এটা পদে পদে যখন অ্যাকচুয়াল ফিল্ডে আমরা যাই, যে কত ডিসক্রিমিনেশন, এবং এই যে নারী উদ্যোক্তারা এরা যে কত কষ্ট করে, কত সহ্য করে চলছে সামাজিক ভাবে, পারিবারিক ভাবে, রাষ্ট্রীয় ভাবে, আমাদের কথা অ্যাকচুয়ালি কেউ ভাবে না। এই জন্য আমি আসলে এরকম আমাদের যত বেশি ডিজিটালি আমরা এই কথাগুলি বলতে থাকবো, আমাদের মনে হয় সিরিজ করা উচিত। ব্র্যাক যদি প্রত্যেক মাসে করতে পারে, কারণ এটা সিরিজ করে, এটা আপনি যদি নক 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 না করেন, তাহলে কিন্তু আমরা ওই দরজা খুলতে পারবো না। থ্যাংক ইউ।
থ্যাংক ইউ সেলিমা। আমি আসলে থ্যাংক ইউ, এটার ব্যাপারে যে ডিসক্রিমিনেশন এবং জেন্ডার সেন্সিটিভনেসটার অভাব আছে, ইট শুড কাম আপ ইন দ্য স্টাডি, যে যারা নীতি নির্ধারকরা থাকেন ফর দোজ হু আর সাপোজ টু বি ওয়ার্কিং অর প্রমোটিং উইমেন এন্টারপ্রেনিয়ার্স, হাউ অ্যাবাউট জেন্ডার সেন্সিটিভিটি অ্যামাং দেয়ার কি বলবো colleagues and themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. I think study teo eta uthe esche, the respondents also felt this discrimination. Ekjon comment box e ekta information diyechen Choiti Ghosh that women are to get 5% of the huge amount, 20,000 crore taka of government stimulus package as per BB circular. Kintu ota dekhte hobe je eta ki oi dusto mohila naki mohila entrepreneur, সেটা আমাদের আরেকটু হয়তো সার্কুলারটাও দেখা দরকার। সো এটাও আমরা দেখব।
ব্যাংকে যোগাযোগ করেছি আমাদের ওমেন চেম্বার থেকে, কোন ব্যাংকে কিন্তু স্পেসিফিক ওই যে 4% দেওয়া হবে, কোন ব্যাংক কিন্তু এখনো আমাদেরকে সেই ইয়েটা এখনো দেয় নাই। সুতরাং যে একটা এন্টারপ্রেনার এখন যে 4% লোন নিয়ে চলে আসবো ওয়ার্কিং ক্যাপিটাল, সেই রাস্তা কিন্তু ওপেন হয় নাই এখন।
চৈতি বলছেন এটা ফর উইমেন এন্টারপ্রেনার, কিন্তু এই যে বিটুইন দ্য বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক টু দ্য কমার্শিয়াল ব্যাংকস ওদের অ্যাক্টিভেট করা, এটা একটা বিশাল একটা যুদ্ধ, যেটা দ্য চেম্বার্স নো, এটা কিন্তু একটা বিশাল ইস্যু। সাজ্জাদ ভাই, আমরা উইল বি ক্লোজিং ইন এ ফিউ মিনিটস, আপনি কি কিছু বলবেন বা অন্য কেউ? I think অনেক issues এসছে, none of you, আমার কাছে close subject very important to me, mental health ইস্যুটা স্টাডিতে উঠেছিল, যে কি stress and strain the women entrepreneurs are having to face, care worker burden, এগুলি আমরা আমাদের সেন্টার থেকে আমরা এটা নিয়ে অনেক কাজ করি, তো এটাও আমি হাইলাইট করতে চাই। এটা নিয়েও যদি কেউ কিছু আরো কিছু বলতে চাই, কিন্তু আমার কাছে মনে হয়েছে এটা একটা ভেরি interesting finding highlighted হয়েছে, and I'm sure এটা খালি not online entrepreneur sector, অন্য সেক্টরেও এই mental stress and strain টা দেখা যায়। যদি আর কিছু না থাকে তাইলে Mehnaz, would you like to say the last তোমার দিক থেকে conclusions? What are you going away with?
থ্যাংক ইউ সবাইকে। আসলে আমরা খুব অনেক মূল্যবান বক্তব্য আজকে পেলাম, আর অনেক নতুন আইডিয়া পেলাম। আমাদের এই সেক্টর নিয়ে আরো অনেক কাজ করার আছে, গবেষণা আমাদের আরো করতে হবে, করব। তো আমি সবাইকে এনকারেজ করবো আমাদের ওয়েবসাইটে পেপার গুলো যে আছে আরো সামনে আসবে সেগুলার উপর চোখ রাখতে। আর আশা করা যায় যে সব ইস্যু নিয়ে আজকে আলাপগুলো হলো, ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল ইনক্লুশন, আইটি এনেবলড বিজনেস অপারেশন, এইসব ব্যাপার নিয়ে আমরা আরো অ্যাক্টিভ রিসার্চ যদি করতে পারি, যেগুলো আসলে আমাদের একটা দিক নির্দেশনা দিবে। এখন এই পর্যায়ে তো আমাদের এইসব রিসার্চ আসলে দিক নির্দেশনা দিতে পারছে না, যখন আরো পরবর্তীতে আমরা চেষ্টা করব। এখন একটা ভিত্তি হলো, এরপরে আমরা সেরকম রিসার্চ করে যাতে আমরা আসলে এই সেক্টরটাকে আমরা অর্থনীতিতে একটু কন্ট্রিবিউশন রাখার মতো একটা জায়গা নেওয়ার মতো একটা কন্ট্রিবিউশন করতে পারি। আশা করা যাচ্ছে সেটা হবে ভবিষ্যতে।
থ্যাংক ইউ মেহনাজ। আর বিআইজিডির পক্ষ থেকে আমি সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ জানাতে চাচ্ছি, পার্টিসিপেন্টস and the panelists যারা সময় করে এসেছেন থেকেছেন, and the presenters আর যারা রিসার্চ টিম আছেন। আমরা বিআইজিডি থেকে আমরা যেমন বিল্ড, বাংলাদেশ উইমেন চেম্বার, এই বিভিন্ন অ্যাসোসিয়েশনের সাথে আমরা যোগাযোগ রাখতে চাই টু টেক আওয়ার ওয়ার্ক ফরওয়ার্ড। বিল্ডের সাথে আগেও কাজ করেছি আমরা, ভবিষ্যতেও আশা করি করব। উইমেন চেম্বারের সাথেও বিভিন্ন রকমের আমাদের রিলেশনশিপ আছে, এগুলিও বজায় রাখবো। And thank you everybody for participating. অন্য মূল্যবান কমেন্টস এসছে, আর আশা করি নেক্সট আমাদের অন্যান্য ওয়েবিনারেও সবার সাথে দেখা হবে। সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ।